Rene, he's been part of the scene in South Africa for how many years?
From late 1989 to 1993.
So, Rene, obviously you departed to SA with a firm knowledge of metal. I mean, you've been exposed to bands like from various genres and stuff. What was it like to suddenly be dropped in Joburg? And it must have been quite an exhilarating time.
Absolutely. It felt like as if I'd landed in Los Angeles or in San Francisco, straight into the Bay Area, some kind of thing like that. All of a sudden there were hordes of fans running around with leather jackets and back patches and denim jackets full of patches of their favorite bands. There was instant recognition. There was a camaraderie there. You wore the T-shirts on the streets, going to college, going to school, going to work, whatever. And it was a brotherhood. I mean, there were really good friendships amongst metalheads that I was able to foster over time. Like I mentioned, George to you earlier, George Morogimis and Hillbrow. And he was a prominent figure in the scene. I mean, he had all the records, he had all the T-shirts, he knew when the next gig was. He'd phone me up and say, hey, let's go to TJ's on the weekend, or let's go to the Torture Chamber. Urban Assault is coming to town, or Retribution Denied is playing, or Debauchery is going to play, or a combination of these bands. Every second weekend, somewhere in Berea, somewhere in Hillbrow, somewhere in Joubert Park. Joburg was rocking at that time. Early 90s was a great place to be in Johannesburg if you were a fan of extreme music.
Yeah. It's amazing. You mentioned Urban Assault. We haven't had them on yet. I think what really blew me away is when we started talking to, we couldn't have done this whole docu-interview sort of thing without Mark Vass, ex-frontman of Metamorphosis. We couldn't have done it without him. I mean, he clued us in about so many bands that predecessed. I mean, I was of this opinion that, I was really deluded, I was just thinking it all started with Odyssey and Strider and those bands. It did not, and when Dean Smith and Mark Vass joined, suddenly we were informed about bands like Black Rose, Lynx, Tyrant, Unchained. Yeah. Bands that I've never heard of.
Never heard of them. So that also means that when I got there in early 1990. I mean, obviously the scene was really very well established from all those years prior. I mean, the 80s must have been just as good, It's just, I think, when especially death metal and grindcore, bands like Napalm Death, Bolt Thrower, and the whole Swedish death metal scene and the Florida death metal scene, when that was available and accessible in South Africa on LP or cassette or a copy from your buddy or whatever, that made an impact. I mean, that was really the mosh pit, the intensity of the mosh pits, the stage diving, it went to another level.
Yeah.
But I must say, so obviously before I came there, it was more maybe rock and heavy metal, speed metal and thrash, of course. But when we arrived there, and I was 17, 18 at the time, and so death metal was all the rage.
That was the prime of death metal, really. Yeah.
And that was death metal at its finest. From 1990, 1989 to 1994, 96. That was, I think, in my opinion, that was the stellar times for the death metal scene.
Yeah.
And Joburg picked it up, Cape Town picked it up. I don't know if Durban had a scene. Obviously, it must have had. But I was never there during those years.
There's a band that I remember from
my orbit. Yeah, my South African metal orbit was Greater Johannesburg for
Greater
me.
Johannesburg, Pretoria. Yeah.
And as it was Cape Town for you, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not going to mention names, but a lot of the bands were heavy rock. And then it sort of morphed and just got heavier and heavier. The more influx they obviously got from outside. And I've been told that the first band that actually started doing more thrashier vibes was a band called Osiris. And if I recall correctly, Osiris were even based for a time period in Cape Town, but originally from the Vaal Triangle. And but that being the first band to actually introduce thrashy elements into their sound. And I mean, I think even the Odyssey album, that debut recorded by Philip Nell, was had some, not being Bay Area thrash obviously, but had some of those elements already, you know. But it's interesting.
So do we know of any international or any British, American, or German bands from the 1980s that actually came to South Africa, to apartheid South Africa, for a tour or for some gigs? I mean, I know in the 90s, I think Napalm Death, they made a short call to
93.
South Africa. But I don't know about the 80s. I think obviously Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath and Metallica, those bands came later to do some shows in SA. But what about the 80s? I mean, do we know of any bands that made an impact or a splash and you know, that were from the States or from Germany or from Britain that had already 2 or 3 records under their belt that we all had in our collections and were yearning to see live?
The first international event I can recall, and I remember it as if it was yesterday, it was my parents actually calling me out of my room. I was listening to metal, of course, and they said, "You got to see this." And then there was live footage of a Tony Martin fronted Black Sabbath playing Sun City.
Yes.
That to me was the first. Yeah. Well aware of the sanctions, that was to me the first touch point for international music. I think Napalm. I don't know if there was anything between that. I think the next touch point for me is Napalm Death '93 playing Joburg, Cape Town. I was at the Cape Town show in Belleville at oh my god, I can't believe I'm forgetting the club now. At Raffles. And then later on, apparently Carcass followed when I was already gone.
Yes.
Carcass, a lot of bands play. Sepultura, apparently. I don't know, I'm not sure. I've lost track.
Well, I mean, I think already. And what about the 70s? I mean, there must have been a thriving hard rock, progressive rock, psychedelic rock scene as well.
Must have been.
I'm sure Johannesburg, Cape Town, you know, there was Led Zeppelin playing. I mean, not live, obviously, but, you know, they're out of the jukebox, if you will it, or, you know, that you had all these bands, these legendary bands from the 70s. And even though I know because of sanctions and boycotts, the material was probably not readily available.
Yeah.
I mean, we struggled to get records and cassettes, you know, with censorship and that shit. So that was hard to get. It was hard to get original albums from all the bands that you love.
Well, here you go. That's a question I readily love to ask, and also an interesting question is a lot of the guys that we already interviewed already mentioned Look and Listen.
And that Look and Listen. And there was another one. This is in Hillbrow, and across the street there was another one that was legendary and famous. And I just remember the name, but you had to go down the stairs and you would be in LP heaven, because there would just be rows.
Yeah.
And they were neatly stacked, and you would actually get so good with your hands when you were flipping through them.
Yeah. And it's just like
when you recognize the logo, when you recognize the cover and the artwork, and you're like, yeah, I got it. Yes.
There you go.
You didn't have the $20 to buy it. So you went over to the counter because you knew the guy and he said he'd hold it for you for a month.
That's it. But you went through LPs like a cashier goes through cash.
Oh man, all that my pocket money could provide.
That's amazing. I remember actually, I don't know if it was 98. No, sorry, not 98, of course. 88. 88 or 89. My parents took a trip with me down to South Africa, and then we went to a shopping center called Eastgate. And I remember walking into that store, and they had everything. I mean, for a metalhead of that time, I just saw Saxon. Most of the Saxon albums were there. Most of the Dio albums were there. All the bands that at the time were sort of in your top of mind. Motorhead, Rat, Keel. You know, all the heavy rock, come metal, come hard rock, more sleaze, whatever. Motley Crue, everything. You had everything. And that's where I got my Shout at the Devil, Motley Crue, and I got a Dio, and fuck, that was just, I couldn't believe it. And what really fucked my mind was like my mom saying, it's 2 records and we're going. And I was like, no, we're only going to be here once.
And that was excruciating because you knew you only had all that good stuff on some TDK or Sony cassette, like a third-rate copy or something.
No, literally.
And to finally be able to own the original albums, tangible in your hands, either later on CD or on LP preferably, it was just awesome to have the inner sleeve and to actually hold the thing in your hand. And, you know,
but isn't that
the original album?
Isn't that the beauty? I mean, look at today. Nobody cares about album covers and shit. You know, it's so interchangeable. But my mom had to pry me out of that shop. I mean, I held so many albums in my hand, and I couldn't decide. I was like, fuck, I want all of them. You know, they're beautiful. The cover artworks. I wanted to go home and study them.
No, I mean it's an ongoing journey. I mean, it's even nowadays it's still great to obtain long sought after CDs. You know, if you can get them on vinyl, that's even better. But you know, just to get it on CD finally after all these years, and some of the stuff's become so rare, you actually have to really search for them. You know? Certainly it's always been a big part of my fanhood. Is to go through a record collection, pick it up, look at the back photos, take out the lyric sheets, and if you can put the thing on the turntable, even better. It's just the overall experience of holding an original album by your favorite bands is something that'll never leave me.
I remember the discussions you and me had about a certain record, Pestilence Maleus Vicarum.
That was brought to me by Dirk Trumper to my home in Joburg in Edenvale in 1990. And I think the second night that when Dirk was there, we actually went to Hillbrow, to the record shops, and I showed Dirk a bit of the Hillbrow nightlife, and I think we went to either the Torture Chamber or to one of these other clubs, not to a live show, but just have a few beers and And just to be metal fans amongst metal fans,
Tell me,
in the big city.
Tell me, was there a club known to you called the Gold Banana?
I just remember there was another club in Joburg that was not far. It was almost in the neighborhood, which was a techno disco pop club called Bella Napoli, and this was just down the road from I think the Torture Chamber in downtown Johannesburg in Hillbrow. And when there was a metal show, we'd of course come down the street with our leather jackets and our denim shirts with our patches and back patches, and trying to grow long hair. George already had long hair. Most of the other guys had long hair. But I just come from Swakop, so obviously my hair was still short, you recall. But so I was finally able to grow my hair, and going out with my mates to see these bands. And then across the street, all the pop guys, all the poppers, and all the techno freaks would go to Bella Napoli, and we'd look across the street and sort of give them a wink and smile at them, and knowing that we were going to something better.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. Magical stories. I recall us actually receiving our copies of that said album, Maleus Vicarum, actually thinking it's sounding so clean. Because we were used to the tape copy.
Yeah, the copy was almost more mystifying and
Yeah.
therefore more appealing because the sound quality was so crap.
It's amazing what it does to you, eh? But anyway, so have you seen bands live like Urban Assault and let me start earlier. Strider, the early bands, Odyssey, were they active live when you were there? What were the earliest?
So I think yeah, I think that's what we touched on earlier. I think Strider and Ragnarok and the other bands that you mentioned now, I think they were already way active or already inactive by the time that I got there in 1990. Mm-hmm. So when I arrived there, I was introduced to Urban Assault and then Retribution Denied, and then I think a year later, Debauchery made quite a splash. So at a pinch, those are the three main bands that I can recall seeing live more than once in Johannesburg.
Yeah.
So Strider and those other acts, I think they were, I don't know whether they still act, I can't recall if they were active in the 90s or whether they were already, whether they were probably more active in the 80s before I got there.
Yeah.
Because I don't recall them. I don't recall the names.
Yeah.
Or I might have forgotten them, but I've certainly never seen them, either as a headliner or as an opening act. That doesn't strike a bell.
Yeah.
So Urban Assault, Debauchery, and Retribution Tonight would be the main three bands I can recall quite clearly having seen more than once.
Because I remember very illustrated letters I used to receive from you.
Oh, yeah.
They were classic. I wish I still had them.
No, well, like me, like you, it was just mind-boggling, to come from Namibia, where we come from, just fresh out of school, and all I've got in my suitcase is a couple of copies from, bands that introduced me to the genre. And then I'm now in the big city, and there's a vibrant scene. There's local bands playing live. There's record shops where you can actually get original albums from your favorite bands, and you can get to every second week or so you can go to a club and there'd be actually live heavy metal, thrash, speed, death metal on stage.
Yeah.
That was just like, I mean. Later on, I went to Germany and I saw a lot of international bands live, and that was another quantum leap as a fan. But certainly, Joburg was made a huge impression on my years as a teenager, turning into a young man as a metal fan, but also in general. I mean, Johannesburg it's a big city, so it's overwhelming. If you're not used to that, I mean, we came from Swakopmund, which was a tiny little dorp.
It's a dorp.
Somewhere in the desert here. So Joburg is a whole different ballgame, and it made a huge impression on me and my life at the time. Not just the music, but the big city in general, and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, for sure. Tell me, are there any sort of recollections when you went to Germany? You obviously took your Retribution Denied demos with you. Did you?
Yeah.
How was that received? Did you share that with your mates there?
Absolutely. I mean, Germany was full on death metal at the time as well. I mean, when I went over there, it was already 1993, and I went over there with a few demo tapes that I had from Retribution Denied, from Debauchery. And then a year later, you sent me by post a tape, a cassette, a compilation, a sampler called The Death of Africa.
Yeah.
And that, my friend, it blew a lot of the guys that I played it to completely away. I mean, we were all into Monstrosity, we were into Morbid Angel at the time, Disincarnate came out, Cancer, and yet here were these bands from SA on the sampler. And they were they were remarkably good.
Yes.
They knew they knew death metal, they knew the genre. They were influenced by the same bands that all the younger bands in Europe were influenced by that came out at the time, like Sinister and Benediction and what have you. So the South African bands on their sampler it's a great documentation. It's a great portrayal of where South African death metal was at the time, and it was certainly high up.
And that's
you could internationally you could rate it right up there with anything that came out of the States or out of Australia.
Definitely from a sound perspective as well. I think, and that's what we discussed at length over various of our interviews. Is I think Mark.
I mean, so I think a lot of on that particular sampler, just to get back to the Death of Africa, the compilation there. You know, technically, from a musician standpoint, technically, those guys knew what they were doing. I mean, you know, they had all the death metal criteria covered. You know, there were good blast beats, there was good technical drumming, ferocious riffing, you know, intricate riffing, really fast and technically able, and of course, deep, gruff vocals. I mean, you know, like Carl Willett's. You know, I mean, all the deep tones, gruff, rough growlers of the time that could have come out of Florida, they came out of South Africa too.
And that's, like I said, that was a huge point of discussion because just from my point of view, I always found in Namibia we had it even harder. I mean, just to try and get the sound. And I think that's where South Africa was blessed in the sense that Philip Nell who started with bands like Odyssey, and he had an ear. He had an ear. And he was later on with In-House Records he was doing the productions for Retribution and those guys. And you could hear.
Me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was in-house studios.
In-house studios, yeah. Later, I think In-House Records,
So could in-house studios, could it not be the South African Morris sound?
Basically, that's what I like to call it. It's basically Philip. No, Philip for me had an ear for the sound. Most of the engineers I learned the hard way in Namibia. There was no Scott Burns in Namibia. they all just knew how to mix jazz fusion or blues rock and they. I mean, I remember us recording our Arcana album. The guy was appalled when I said like. Yes, when I went to the desk and said, like, the guitar need to be here. And he was like, no fucking way. You know, like, they didn't know what to do with it. And I've had a long, check my interview with Philip Nell, by the way. It really, and I had the privilege of actually, with VOD, record in his with him in the studio and hearing that. Somebody that actually knows how to tame.
Where was Bluetooth here recorded?
Bluetooth here was actually recorded in Academy Studios. Greg, correct me if I'm wrong. Academy Studios, Paradise Lost fame.
Yeah.
Engineered by Mags, by someone called Mags. They recorded in the UK. But we recorded, when I was still in VOD, we recorded a demo with Philip, but we never released that. We recorded some new songs, Pieces Born, that kind of stuff. But
all of those recordings were done in the cave. You didn't move up to Joburg to record.
No, we went to Joburg. We went to, we stayed at Philip's place in Basonia, and we went into downtown studios in the city. And I have vivid memories of that. I remember Philip chasing us out of the studio and going like, go have a burger, fuck off, I need to mix. And then we came back and then suddenly you heard, whoa. Yeah.
So that means, you know, Philip and the studio, was of course part of the scene that must have already flourished in the 1980s with Strider and those older bands.
Look, Philip was, Philip was
I never got to see.
Yeah. Philip was himself an active musician. He played in a band called Axe, and he mixed a lot of the bands. You might have gone to a show where he mixed, you know, like Retribution. I mean, those were his bands. I mean, Retribution. Obviously, VOD not because VOD. I mean, we played. I don't know if VOD actually played in your time in Joburg. I went.
Yeah, they did. No. Listen, I went to a VOD show. And I think this was quite a package. I mean, on the bill, I think it was three or four bands. There was Retribution the night, and there was VOD for sure, because George and I went to that particular gig, and he called me up days before, and he said, "Hey, VOD are coming up from Cape Town. You know, we got to get out there. You can't miss it." And we went, and we flipping. I remember that was a mosh pit.
Wow.
Notes.
Cool.
Stage diving. It was a fantastic, a very memorable gig, and VOD was. I don't know if they opened or if they played second or third, or who was headlining. I don't think that was important at the time anyway. But we had 3 or 4 SA bands in Johannesburg that night, and VOD had come up from Cape Town a few days prior.
Wow. Yes.
And I think they played 2 or 3 shows.
I think when I send this footage to Greg, he'll tell me when that was. No, but really,
well,
cool.
I mean,
Amazing.
And ask George about. Ask Greg about George. I think I'm mentioning George time and again because he was quite a prominent figure in the scene. He was well known. Because he wasn't working and he wasn't really. I mean, he was 15, but he wasn't in school either. He was just at home at the flat that they had upstairs in Hillbrow. Him and his mom and his dad.
Yeah.
And the only thing that he got pocket money from his mother, and
all he did was buy records.
The only thing that he ever did was he'd hang around, Joubert Park Technical College and wait for us other kids to come out from our studies, and then talk about metal and change tapes or trade tapes, or just flyers. He would hand out flyers from gigs that were going to happen. And he's like, come on guys, be there, it's going to rock and we need to be there. And
what was his full name again? He was George
and he was the complete metal fan at the time. I mean, and for his age, to be 15 and to have such a wide spectrum of
music.
Anything from Napalm Death to Rush and Yes.
Wow.
At 15. At 15.
That's amazing.
There was Queensryche, dude. There was death metal, and right next to it, there were Queensryche. There was, some prog rock.
So he appreciated the entire spectrum.
He was amazing, and he his knowledge. But this is the point. He wasn't doing anything else. He'd take the pocket money from his mom, go down to Look and Listen, pick up all the records
what a
that
life.
he ordered, take them back home, and spend the rest of the afternoon listening to records. So his mother made it happen, and he had a huge record collection draped around his stereo against the wall. And I'd visit him on weekends. I was living in Edenvale, near Kempton Park at the time.
Yeah.
And on weekends, before we went to a show or something like that, we'd hook up at his place and listen to music. He'd show me the records, and I'd over all these releases that I wish I had in my collection, because my collection was rather pitiful compared to his.
Puny.
And he had them all. He had all the Slayers, he had all the thrash bands you could think of, all the death metal records, and he had all the new stuff. I mean, there were new labels coming out in Europe like Nuclear Blast, and all of a sudden he had these records by Punch and Stench and Master.
Yeah.
And Dismember, and you name it. So there you go. So he was instrumental, I think, in Johannesburg, in the Johannesburg metal scene.
Fucking crazy.
During the 1990s. Yeah.
Where is he now?
Greg must remember him. I'll send you another photograph of that time, and he knew all the guys. He knew James Gell from Retribution Denied, the drummer. Andre Foster, and he knew the VOD guys as well. He knew Francois.
Andre Foster was Debauchery.
Or Debauchery, yeah.
Yeah, I think
I've got a Retribution Denied.
Is
he not on the first Retribution Denied?
I've got Andre Foster as a contact on Facebook. I think he was Debauchery. We still want to contact him.
I thought he was on. There's a demo called "The Meat Shall Inherit the Earth" from Retribution Denied, and I think Andy Foster is on there. But I stand corrected.
I just remember James Gull, Brad Noble on bass, I think.
Brad Noble, that's it.
Yeah. That's where my memory eludes me. But so tell me, just quickly to wrap up with the SA scene. Do you still have? Yeah. Any Urban Assault stuff, material, demos, anything?
I've got an original cassette from Retribution Denied called "The Meek Shall Inherit the Earth."
Yeah, okay, that's quite common. Yeah.
I think it was their first or their second demo, and it's an in-house production. And
yeah, it's got that earth.
any other material, and I actually had quite a lot. I had T-shirts, I had flyers, I had tapes, of course, from Urban Assault, Debauchery, all the tape trading, all the tape stuff that was traded at the gigs before and after the venue. So a lot of that stuff got lost because I was moving around quite a lot after that. I moved to Germany.
Yeah,
I moved
obviously.
back to Namibia.
You can't take everything.
I moved, and with all that moving around, a lot of those cassettes got lost along the way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah. Especially, in light of rejuvenating, the scene, or in retrospect, talking about it and digging out for gems, material that was obtained during those years. Unfortunately, a lot of that stuff I don't have anymore.
It is what it is.